Welcome back to AU Family Channel, and thank you so much for being here. It truly means the world to have you as one of our loyal listeners. If our stories have ever touched your heart, we are so grateful that you keep coming back to spend this time with us. So find somewhere comfortable, take a slow, deep breath, and let us begin today's story, together. The Christmas I remember most is the one where we had nothing. No tree that first week, no presents wrapped under it, no big dinner planned, no money in the account to make any of it happen. My father had lost his job in November, and by December we were 3 payments behind on the house, counting coins on the kitchen table to buy bread. I was 16, and I was ashamed, and I was angry at the whole world. I braced myself for the emptiest, bleakest Christmas of my life. What I did not know yet was that this broke and frightened winter was about to become the most meaningful Christmas my family ever had. Let me take you back to the November it all fell apart. My dad worked at a factory on the edge of town for 19 years. He was proud of that job, proud of never missing a day, proud of the way he provided for us without ever making it look hard. Then one gray Tuesday they closed the whole line. Just like that, 300 workers walked out into the cold parking lot holding cardboard boxes, and my father was one of them. He came home early that day, and I knew before he said a word. His face had a look I had never seen on him, the look of a man who did not know what came next. At first my parents tried to hide how bad it was. They kept smiling at dinner, kept saying we would be fine, kept telling me and my little sister Grace not to worry. But you cannot hide a thing like that from a house for long. I heard them at night, their voices low and tight through the wall, talking about the mortgage, the electric bill, the car payment they could not make. I would lie in the dark and stare at the ceiling and feel the whole world getting smaller around us. My mother started skipping meals and calling it not being hungry. I noticed everything that winter. Money went from tight to gone with frightening speed. My dad applied everywhere. He put on his one good shirt every single morning and drove to every factory, every warehouse, every shop in the county, and every evening he came home with the same quiet no. It was the worst season for hiring, the middle of a bad winter in a small town where half the work had dried up. The savings ran out by the first week of December. Then came the letter from the bank, the one with the heavy words, the one that said if we could not catch up we could lose the house by spring. We were drowning, and everyone could see it. I was 16, and I handled it the way a lot of scared kids do. I got angry. I was angry at my dad for losing the job, even though I knew it was not his fault. I was angry at my mom for the worry lines that had carved themselves into her face. I was angry at the other kids at school with their new coats and their easy laughs and their families that were not falling apart. Most of all I was ashamed, a deep and burning shame, the kind that makes you keep your friends at the door and never let them inside. I did not want anyone to see how we were living. I did not want anyone to know. The shame got worse as December went on and the whole town started to sparkle. Every house on our street strung up their lights. Every shop window filled with warmth and gold and the promise of gifts. The school hallways buzzed with talk of what everyone was getting, where everyone was going, the holidays that lay ahead like bright unopened packages. And there I was, wearing the same worn coat from 2 winters ago, walking home to a house where we turned the heat down to save money and wore our jackets indoors. I felt like the whole shining season was a party thrown just to remind me exactly what my family did not have. My little sister Grace was 8 that year, and she still believed. She still had that wide-open Christmas heart that had not yet learned what money was. She made a list, a long careful list in her best handwriting, and she left it on the fridge like she did every year. I remember standing in the kitchen reading it, a small doll, a set of coloring pens, a red winter hat, nothing expensive, nothing extravagant, just the small dreams of a small girl. And I remember the way my mother looked at that list, the way her hand came up to her mouth, because we all knew there was no money for even that. Not even that. One night I came downstairs for water and found my mom sitting alone at the kitchen table in the dark. She had Grace's list in her hands, and she was crying, trying to do it silently so no one would hear. I stood frozen on the stairs. My mother, who had held our whole family together with her bare hands all winter, who had smiled through every hard day, was sitting in the dark crying over a doll and a set of pens she could not buy her daughter. I had never felt so helpless in my life. I went back upstairs without the water. I did not want her to know I had seen. But I never forgot it. That was the night my anger started to change into something else. I lay awake and I thought, I am 16, I am not a child, I can do something. So the next day I went out in the cold and I looked for any work I could find. I shoveled driveways after the snow. I stacked boxes for the grocer for a few dollars an hour. I carried bags, ran errands, did whatever anyone would pay a teenager to do. It was not much. It was never going to be enough to save the house. But every dollar I brought home and put quietly in the jar on the counter made me feel a little less helpless, and a little more like I was part of holding us up. Something shifted in the house that December, slow and quiet, like a thaw you do not notice until the ice is gone. We stopped pretending everything was fine, and somehow that made things easier. We started actually talking to each other. My dad taught me how to fix the leaking pipe under the sink because we could not pay a plumber. My mom and Grace baked bread together because it was cheaper than buying it, and the whole house filled with the warm smell of it. In the evenings, with the television off to save power, we sat together by candlelight and just talked. We had never done that before. We had always been too busy, too comfortable, too full to notice each other. I remember one of those candlelit evenings so clearly. It was snowing outside, thick and slow, and we had no money and no gifts and no idea how we would keep the house, and my dad started telling stories about when he was a boy. Grace was curled up under a blanket laughing. My mom was leaning on his shoulder. And I looked around that dim little room, at my family lit gold by a single candle, and I felt something I had not expected to feel that winter. I felt warm. Not from the heat, because there was barely any. Warm from the inside. It confused me. How could a family with nothing feel like that? Across the street from us lived a man named Mr. Delgado. He was old, and he lived alone, and he had lost his wife a few years back. I never paid him much attention before that winter, just a quiet neighbor who kept to himself and shoveled his own walk. But that December I noticed his house went dark and cold too. His lights stayed off. I learned from my mom that he had fallen on hard times as well, his pension stretched thin, his own struggles hidden behind his own front door. He was another person in our little corner of the world barely holding on. I did not know it yet, but that lonely old man was about to change everything. It was 2 days before Christmas when I saw Mr. Delgado slip on the ice outside his house. I ran across the street and helped him up, and he was shaken but all right, and he thanked me and asked me to help him inside. His house was cold and nearly empty, and I saw how little he had, and something in me could not just leave. So I shoveled his walk. I carried in the little firewood he had. I stayed and talked with him, and he told me about his wife, and about the Christmases they used to have, and the loneliness in his voice was a thing I recognized, because I had felt it in my own house all month. I started going over to Mr. Delgado's every day after that. I would bring him some of the bread my mom baked. I would sit with him. My whole family took to him, the way you take to someone when you are all struggling in the same cold season. Grace drew him pictures. My dad helped him fix a broken window. We had nothing to give but our time and our company, and it turned out that was exactly the thing that lonely old man needed most. And here is what I did not understand yet. In reaching out to someone with even less than us, we were the ones who were being lifted up. On Christmas Eve, our house was quiet. There was no tree, though my dad had brought home a small branch of pine and Grace had hung a few paper stars on it. There were no presents. We had made a simple dinner, soup and the good bread, and we were grateful for it. I remember feeling a strange kind of peace, the anger finally gone out of me, replaced by something softer. We were together. The house was still ours for tonight. And I had learned that December that as long as we had each other, we were not truly poor. But the night was not over. Something was about to happen that I have never forgotten. There was a knock at the door on Christmas Eve. My dad opened it, and there stood Mr. Delgado, bundled up in his old coat, holding a small box in his shaking hands. He said he did not have much, but he wanted us to have this, because we had been the only ones who saw him all winter, the only ones who had made him feel like he still mattered. My mom tried to say no, we could not take anything from him, he had so little himself. But the old man just pressed the box into my father's hands and said, "Please. Let an old man feel useful one more Christmas." And my father, humbled, took it. Inside the box was a small amount of money, folded carefully, and a note. The money was not a fortune, but for us that winter it was everything, enough to cover the electric bill and put a real meal on the table. The note said, "Thank you for seeing me. Merry Christmas to the kindest family on the street." My mother read it out loud and could not finish. We stood there in our cold little house, this struggling old man and my struggling family, all of us with nothing, and I have never in my life felt so rich. He had given us more than money. He had given us proof that kindness comes back around, even in the hardest winter. That was the moment everything turned. Because my dad, holding that money and that note, started to cry, and then he did something I will never forget. He said we could not keep all of it, that Mr. Delgado needed to eat too, and he insisted the old man stay for Christmas. So Mr. Delgado sat down at our table on Christmas Eve, and our family of 4 became a family of 5 that night. My mom stretched the soup. We lit every candle we had. And that empty, broke, frightened house filled up with more laughter and more warmth than it had held in years. I looked around and realized this was not the worst Christmas. It was becoming the best one. Word travels in a small town, and somehow ours had started to travel. Maybe it was the grocer I worked for, who had seen me putting my few dollars in the jar. Maybe it was someone from church who knew Mr. Delgado. But on Christmas morning, there was another knock at the door. This time it was a family from down the street, people we barely knew, standing in the snow with a box of groceries and a small wrapped gift for Grace. They said they had heard we were having a hard year, and that no child should wake up on Christmas with nothing. And they would not stay, they just smiled and wished us well and walked back out into the snow. The knocks kept coming that morning. It was the strangest and most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed. A neighbor with a bag of oranges. The man from the hardware store with a small envelope for my dad and a lead on a job. A woman from Grace's school with a red winter hat and a set of coloring pens, the exact things from the list on the fridge, though we never learned how she knew. Our little town, which was struggling too, which did not have much to spare, had quietly decided to carry us. One small kindness at a time, our neighbors filled the emptiness of that Christmas until it overflowed. Grace opened her gifts on the floor by the little pine branch, and her face, oh, her face. The doll she wanted. The coloring pens. The red hat, which she put on immediately and refused to take off all day. She did not know or care that these things came from strangers. To her it was simply Christmas, simply magic, simply the world being good the way she had always believed it was. And watching her, I understood something. My little sister had held on to her faith in Christmas all through the hardest winter of our lives, and in the end the world had risen up to meet that faith. Her belief had been right all along. I found my father standing at the window that morning, watching the snow, wiping his eyes. He put his arm around me and he said something I have carried ever since. He said, "Son, I spent this whole winter feeling like a failure because I could not buy you anything. And now look. We are surrounded by more than money could ever buy." He said he had learned that a man is not measured by what is in his account, but by the people who show up for him when it runs empty. I was 16, and I finally understood that my father, who had lost his job, had never once stopped being the richest kind of man. We had that Christmas dinner all together, my family and Mr. Delgado and even the family from down the street who we finally convinced to come back and join us. Everyone brought a little of what they had, and it all came together into a feast, the way it does when a whole community empties its cupboards into one warm room. There was more food on that table than we had seen in months, and every single bit of it had come from someone reaching out to someone else. I sat there in the noise and the light and the laughter, and I thought about how a month ago I had been so ashamed I would not let anyone through our door. And now our door had let in the whole world. Mr. Delgado told stories at the table that made Grace laugh until she cried. My mother, who had sat in the dark weeping over a doll just weeks before, was glowing at the head of the table, more beautiful than I had ever seen her. My father laughed like the weight had come off his shoulders for the first time in months. And I realized that the thing I had dreaded all winter, this Christmas with nothing, had given us something we could never have bought. It had stripped away everything we thought we needed, and shown us, clear as the snow outside, everything we already had. Each other. Our neighbors. A love that did not cost a thing. After dinner, Mr. Delgado pulled me aside. He thanked me again for that day on the ice, for coming across the street, for seeing a lonely old man when no one else did. And he told me that he had been so low that December that he was not sure he wanted to keep going, and that our family, without ever knowing it, had given him a reason to. I stood there stunned. All that time I thought we were the ones being rescued. All that time I thought we were the ones with nothing to give. And it turned out that the smallest thing I had done, walking across a frozen street to help an old man up, had been holding a whole life together. That night, after everyone had gone home and the candles were burning low, my family sat together in the quiet. Grace was asleep in her new red hat with her new doll tucked under her arm. And my parents held hands across the couch and looked around at the little house we had almost lost, and my mom said, "I would not trade this Christmas for 100 easy ones." And I felt the exact same way. We had started that December with empty hands and broken hearts, braced for the worst. And somehow, through sacrifice and kindness and a whole town of people with nothing sharing what little they had, it had become the fullest night of our lives. Things did not magically fix themselves overnight. I want to be honest with you about that. We were still poor in January. My dad still had to keep looking. But the lead from the hardware store turned into a real job by February, not as good as the old one, but steady enough. The neighbors kept an eye on us through the rest of that hard winter, and we kept an eye on them, and on Mr. Delgado most of all. We caught up on the house payments slowly, month by careful month. We did not lose our home. But even if we had, I think we would have been all right, because that Christmas taught us where home actually lives. Mr. Delgado became part of our family after that. He came for dinner every Sunday. He taught me how to fix an engine and how to play chess and how to grow tomatoes in the summer. He was there for my high school graduation, sitting proud in the front row like the grandfather I never had. When he passed away a few years later, our whole family grieved him like blood, because that is what he had become. And I think about how none of it would have happened if we had not lost everything that winter. Our poverty is what opened the door. Our empty hands are what let him in. I am much older now, and I have had many Christmases since, some of them fat with money and presents and everything a person is supposed to want. And I will tell you the truth. Not one of them has ever come close to the Christmas we had nothing. The full ones blur together, all the gifts forgotten by spring. But that broken, frozen and beautiful Christmas is carved into me forever. Because that was the year I learned what Christmas actually is. It was never the tree, or the presents, or the money, or the feast. It was the people. It was always, only, the people. Grace is grown now, with children of her own, and every year she tells them the story of the Christmas we had nothing. She still has that red hat, worn and faded, kept in a box like treasure. And she tells her kids that the best Christmas of their mother's whole childhood was the one where there were almost no gifts at all. They do not always understand it. How could they, warm and safe and provided for the way they are? But she plants the seed anyway, the way our parents planted it in us, that the fullness of a life is never measured by what is under the tree. I think a lot about why that Christmas felt so full when our hands were so empty. And I believe it is because when you have everything, you stop seeing it. Comfort makes you blind. When the money was flowing and the fridge was full and the presents were easy, we walked past each other in our own home like strangers, each of us busy, distracted, taking it all for granted. It took losing nearly everything for us to finally look up and see what was still standing right in front of us. Our family. Our neighbors. The plain miracle of being alive together in a warm room on a cold night. That is the strange gift hidden inside hard times, and I would not have believed it if I had not lived it. When your hands are full, you cannot hold anything new, and you cannot even feel what you are already holding. But when your hands are empty, you finally see them. You see the people who fill them. You see the love that was there all along, underneath the noise and the stuff and the endless wanting. Poverty took a great deal from my family that winter. But in exchange it gave us the one thing all our comfort had been quietly hiding from us. It gave us each other, seen clearly, maybe for the first time. So I stopped being ashamed of that winter a long time ago. I used to hide it, the lost job, the coins on the table, the coat I wore 2 winters too long. Now I tell it proudly, because it is the truest thing that ever happened to me. That was the winter my family learned who we were. That was the winter a lonely old man and a struggling town taught us that kindness is the one currency that never runs out. That was the winter I stopped measuring my life by what I had, and started measuring it by who I had. And by that measure, we were never poor. Not for a single day. If you are heading into a hard season right now, if your own hands feel empty this year, I want you to hear this from someone who has been exactly where you are. The emptiness you are so afraid of might be about to show you the fullest thing in your life. The gifts you cannot afford to give are not the ones that will be remembered. What gets remembered is the candlelight, the stories, the hands that reached out, the door that opened, the people who stayed. You already have more than you think. Hard times do not take that away. They are the very thing that finally lets you see it. The fullest moments of our lives so often come when our hands are the emptiest, because that is precisely when we finally stop and see what we still have. I did not choose the winter my family lost everything. No one chooses that. But I would not give it back for all the easy Christmases in the world, because it gave me my family, my neighbors, an old man across the street, and a truth I have built the rest of my life upon. Love does not live in what we own. It lives in who we hold. And you cannot go broke, not truly, not ever, as long as you have people to hold and the courage to reach for them. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of this story. It truly means the world that you are here. If the Christmas we had nothing touched your heart the way it still touches mine, please give this video a like, and subscribe to AU Family Channel, where a brand new story is waiting for you every single week. And remember, the fullest moments often come when our hands are emptiest, because that is when we finally see everything we still have. Hold your people close this year, no matter what is or is not under the tree. I will see you in the next one.